I want to play a game.
Man, I have a challenge for all of you podcasters out there. When you talk about Saw movies, you don't have to open with "I want to play a game." It's like when you talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you don't have to start with the scroll. These two podcasters set out to talk about one of the most
The only reason
controversial.
I did it is because we missed out on the opportunity to do that for our Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 episode. So I said, you know what? There's not enough cliches on this channel. I need to put one in this episode. So you're welcome, by the way.
Yeah, well, now, in case you guys didn't see the title or the thumbnail, now you definitely know what franchise we're talking about.
I wonder what we could be talking about today. Folks, yes, we are back with the Not That Bad podcast here. We are discussing yet another movie that people do not like, and that movie has many names if you really want to get down to it. Saw 3D, Saw 7, Saw the final chapter, Saw 3D the final chapter.
Saw the
you
final chapter
Yeah,
3D.
saw the final chapter 3D. Call it whatever you would like at this point. I'm sure nobody will bat an eye. This was released in 2010, originally meant to be a two-parter directed by Kevin Gruder, who actually directed the one before this, which was Saw
He
6, and is
he
directed
directed
Saw
Saw
10 as well.
6, and he came back to direct Saw 10. Previously, he
Yep.
was the editors of all of these Saw movies. He was the editor on all the Saw movies, starting with the original, then got to direct Saw 6, which is some people's favorite, and some people would be me. Then he came back for Saw 10, which was a beautiful comeback for this
Yeah.
franchise. Not to disparage Spiral, which was a comeback in its own way, but it was a great comeback for the Jigsaw family. John Kramer and his crew and his storyline. So yeah, Kevin Gruder, is that how you pronounce his name?
I Sure. I'm just gonna say it is. I feel bad for the guy if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but
Yeah, you can tell how
that's
much
what I'm gonna
research
roll with.
goes into one of these episodes. But yeah,
Not much. No.
this was his second time directing a Saw movie,
Yep.
and it turned out it would be the last Saw movie for a while, because Saw
Yeah.
6 did not make as much money for some reason, for some damn reason. I guess, wait, this is our first time talking about the Saw movies on this channel, right?
Yeah. This we've never touched the franchise before, which is crazy because I love it, and I'm really surprised we've never defended a
I love
movie on
it.
here before.
It's it's simultaneously one of the biggest horror franchises, and I think at least one of the most polarizing. For a time, I would have said one of the most uh, disliked. People kind of forget this now that we're in an elevated horror age, but back in the day, if you really liked horror movies, if that was part of your identity, people
Right.
treated you like there was something seriously wrong with you.
Oh yeah.
And Saw was the poster child for that. Even the first one, which is relatively tame and relatively admired, for what it is and what it started. Yeah, there was a huge stigma to these movies, and I think it really culminated in this Saw, the final chapter, Saw 3D.
This did not do many favors for horror fans. I mean, for me, even still today, sometimes it's weird how much that landscape has changed. When you turn on Good Morning America and they're talking about Terrifier 2, and you're like, what is going on? What is happening? It's still a little weird for me. But back then, I mean, it's not like these weren't still making money. They weren't making the same money that it was making at its peak. But even this movie here had a $17 million budget, made $136.2 million at the box office, which is pretty impressive. That's a big return. I mean, the returns are going down, but they still made it happen. Unfortunately, however, they may have read the room correctly, because 9% on Rotten Tomatoes and an eventual 2.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd indicates that the fans weren't necessarily super happy with this. Um,
Yeah,
Now,
we
I had
don't
brought
have
up.
the. I just have to say that we were not seeing these movies at this time. We were not
Oh,
fans
right.
of the Saw
Yes.
films at this time as they were coming out. I'm really curious what my out of theater reaction would have been walking out of Saw the final chapter. I feel like I would have been in line with a lot of those voices of disappointment. You know,
Huh.
but yeah, I mean, now we get to look back, and now it's not the final chapter. Now it's just another Jigsaw movie, and I think compared to some of the stuff that's come after, it's a pretty good one.
Oh my God. Yeah. I meant to ask you this. So, having said, the context of these movies, where this one is 7 films in, the first one coming out in 2004, this is actually 20 years this year, since the first Saw movie came out. You, you may not have been a fan as they were coming out. We were pretty young throughout the duration of the release of these original movies.
Yeah,
So what is sort of your past with the Saw franchise? Do you have like a pretty strong connection to it, or you just kind of a little weaker on it like some people?
no, I have a deep past with the Saw films. I have a bit of a loyalty to it, and that's probably because it belongs to a sacred genre for me, which is um, weekend movies at my friend's house flicks. Going
Very fair.
over
Yeah.
to a a friend's house and marathoning the Saw movies, debating which ones were the best, talking about our favorite traps, our favorite villains, our favorite heroes. Really appreciating these movies as a franchise and not a torture porn extravaganza. Although
Right.
you have to admire how gnarly and creative some of these traps are, and I don't disparage people who come to these movies for that reason, to enjoy what sick, twisted innovation will come with the next Saw movie. That's a big part of the appeal for me. There's a lot of creativity there, but man, it's the lore of Jigsaw. It's the mythos. It's the mythology, and weirdly to say, for a little slasher series of movies, but the philosophy, the philosophy at the heart of all these movies. And I really don't say that in any kind of tongue-in-cheek way. I think that's what John Kramer represents to me, is like he represents a worldview, which is not something you can really say about Freddy or Jason or Chucky or all those dudes that I love, but he does represent something really different from them. That's not something that this movie capitalizes on very well. Jigsaw died in the third
Right.
movie, and he has maybe 3 minutes of screen time, which is hilarious. The most iconic de-aging. Like, why are we spending
Hello, fellow
millions of
kids.
dollars? Why are we spending millions of dollars to de-age these actors when you can just stick a backwards baseball cap on them?
We will certainly get there. It is so funny. Oh my God, there are a lot of things in this movie that are unintentionally hilarious. We'll kind of get to them as we go. I know for me, like my first experience with Saw, I don't know if this was the same for you. I don't remember if it was AMC or not, but when I was a kid, occasionally they would show the first 3 Saw movies on television. And so you'd be able to see, kind of what these movies were about. And I had the fortune of seeing them on television first as a kid, so that my parents knew what they were, but they saw a majority of the scenes and felt like, there's no nudity. He'll be fine. That was their only rule, really, when I was a kid. Just don't do that. And if it
And
scares
what
them
a
too
rule
much,
that
then
is, right? I mean,
right,
think about this, the way we scrutinize violence, bloodletting, maiming, torture.
right.
Um, how much less we scrutinize that than just sex and nudity. I mean, Gen Z, our generation, is furiously trying to stamp out sex in movies, but I don't hear any of
It's
them
insane.
complaining about torture scenes or gore. I mean, I'm sure there are some of those voices out there, but it's not a movement the way it is to get rid of sex and nudity, which I guess the Saw movies are for you then, because this has to be the least sexy series of movies. I mean, goddamn, like when I think of the Saw movies, I think of like a gas station bathroom.
Yeah, I mean, after the first movie, that's kind of hard. I mean, they're basically in this like, what I've been in many gas station bathrooms that
That look exactly like
resemble the
that.
first Saw movie. Minus the bathtub, but if some of them could use one. But no, I mean, like, this was actually the first Saw movie I owned, was the final chapter. I mean, it came out in 2010. I probably purchased it in 2012. So it's been on DVD for a while. Hit the bargain bin. I picked it up. And since then, I had seen, on demand was a fantastic service for us kids growing up, because you could see movies on there that you normally wouldn't be able to, or that maybe you weren't allowed to watch. And so I had seen all of them, and this movie came out, and I bought it on DVD before I even watched it, which is a trend for me. It's something I have had to stop doing thanks to several movies over the last few years. But this movie held a special place in my heart for a long time. In fact, before I was in like horror groups and stuff, I didn't know anybody disliked this movie. I was shocked to see how people felt about it.
Well, this was the first Saw movie I was aware of as it came out. Like I
Okay.
remember seeing the poster whenever I visited the theater around
Yes.
this time, 2009, 2010. A poster that is larger than life and kind of the movie doesn't really deliver on the promise of the scale of the
That I will
poster.
agree on. Yes, absolutely.
Not that any reasonable person would really expect that. I would have loved to have seen a Megatron Jigsaw kind of like come out and kaiju at the end.
But see,
But
like, you know what? Like, how many 80s movies, like, that's one of my biggest gripe with 80s movies is sometimes you're tricked into watching them by this incredible poster, and then you watch it and it's just awful. But
yeah,
like, how
so
many 80s movies live up to their poster? Like Gremlins 2, what came out in 90, and that poster was crazy, and the movie was crazy. But what other movies live up to their crazy posters?
no,
You know
you
what I
know
mean?
how people complain that oftentimes the trailer is better than the movie. Well, back in the 80s, it was the poster that
Yeah.
was better than the movies, by and large. You
Saw
know,
7 was bringing that back.
it was bringing that back in style. You know what else it was bringing back? It was 3D in
Yeah.
horror. It brought back two things. It brought back 3D, and it brought back calling yourself the final chapter when you were nowhere near the final chapter. You have no right
Yeah.
to call yourself the final chapter. Now, this was the final chapter for a while. It wasn't like what Friday the 13th, I think part 5 came out just a year after their final chapter. So
Right.
Jigsaw was dead and buried for a while, and they only recently decided to actually continue this storyline. They tried to
Yeah.
reboot it twice. I guess neither of those really stuck. Wonder why. Wonder why Jigsaw didn't take off.
Yeah. God. And I just want to say this, like, we are pretty positive on this show. There's a reason we're talking about Saw 7 and not a movie like Jigsaw. That is an example of a movie that contributed towards my sort of rule nowadays of not purchasing a movie without having watched it first. I'm gonna break that rule very soon. There's a movie that's coming out on physical media over the sometime in the next couple of months that I will be breaking that rule for. But generally now I have to watch a movie first. Um, and luckily, streaming makes that pretty easy. But Jigsaw was one of those movies. We got it on a vacation, like right after it came out. We were like, "Hey, let's watch it during our downtime." And I hate that. I detest that movie. And there were no other Saw movies before that point that I detested. So we'll
Yeah,
see if this viewing held that up for me.
I don't know if
But
it. I don't know if I detest Jigsaw. That
oh,
would require me to have any feeling towards it. I just have no love for it. It's the only film in this franchise that I really have no affection for. Now, Saw 7. Hmm. Affection is a strong word for Saw 7, but in a way that it represents, I guess, where horror movies were during my childhood, and represents this moment in time when the Saw movies were at their peak. They, I guess, had started with they got those diminishing returns starting with Saw 6 for whatever reason, and Saw 7 is nowhere near as good as Saw 6. But I, well, like, take the opening scene for example, our opening
yep,
kill.
let's dive in. Yeah.
Okay, this represents the best that this franchise represents. Okay, we have our first public trap. These two bozos have a buzzsaw between them, and the girl that they're both hooking up with is dangling over their heads, and they have
Yeah.
to either kill each other or kill her. And let me tell you something, man. When George Méliès helped pioneer the moving picture, he had no idea that that venture would one day lead to Saw 7. And I think that's a shame that he has no idea that he helped pave the path for this. I mean, am I hyping this up too much? It's one of my favorite like Saw traps in the series, and it sets the perfect tone for Saw 7 because it lets you know that this is not one of those Saw movies that takes itself ultra seriously. Like I think Saw 3 through 5 has been criticized for.
Yeah, and first of all, I completely agree. Like, I think it's an incredible way to open up a Saw movie, especially 7 movies in. The fact that it grabs you that much during the opening, I think is awesome. Um, I I like it for 2 reasons. First of all, yeah, it's not too like, overly serious. Like you said, the last 3 movies you could criticize for doing that. 4 through 6, sort of took themselves to a level where it's like, okay, like you can have a little bit of fun with a movie like this. I think you almost need to at certain scenes. There's a lot of really terrible shit that you're watching, and sometimes it's happening to terrible people. But I feel like sometimes horror fans forget that like this is pretty awful that this is happening to people.
Oh no. Oh my
Um,
gosh. I had this one moment of real reflection one time when I was watching I think I Saw 2, and my wife wasn't watching with me. She hates these movies, but she was off somewhere.
yeah.
And then she walked in on me watching I think the needle pit scene.
Oh yeah, Needle Pit, absolutely.
And I just felt like a real sense of shame. It was like she walked in on me watching porn or something. And just I finally had to say, I guess these movies are a little mean spirited, aren't they?
Yeah, I'll say this. The other reason I appreciate that first kill is the reason I sort of appreciate all of them in this movie, and I'm gonna get into it a little bit later, but it plays into a big difference between the character of Jigsaw that we meet, and see through the first, it's pretty heavily through the first 3 films, especially, and Hoffman, Detective Hoffman, and what differences they have in how they set their saw traps up. And it really makes me appreciate it a little bit more. But that doesn't change the fact that while you're watching it, it can be really tough. And we're going to get to one in a couple of minutes here as we go through this movie that is also very memorable and very rough to watch. In fact, a lot of this movie is that. Very good
Peeling
traps, very
off my
memorable.
skin.
Yeah,
For some
exactly.
reason, I'm playing a skinhead. Yeah.
But we see this public love triangle play out in front of people, which I thought incredible concept. It's executed pretty well. There are things that maybe could have been done better, but like you said, it sort of plays into this not taking itself as seriously.
Yeah, this is the
And
campiest I think these original Saw movies
right,
got.
yeah.
There is something very creepy about the voyeurism of having to go through this
Oh
with
yeah,
all these people watching you. But yeah, I laughed out loud when that lady tried to smash the glass with her briefcase. Like, oh my God, these people are gonna die. What can we do to save them? Here, my leather bound briefcase will save the day. And it's so dramatic, like when she taps the window with her case
yeah.
and it doesn't break, and there's like that Saw like music cue, like oh my God, like there's no way to save these people. Like oh maybe if you got a heavier briefcase, maybe if you got an authority, a person of authority, I don't know.
Maybe if you put a brick in your briefcase for emergency situations like this,
Uh-huh.
lady. No, I think what I like about it so much is that in execution, it's not laughably bad, but it does, like there are things about it that make you chuckle. But in actual concept, like think of being in public. You're just taking a walk, and then you see this happening in front of you. It's a terrifying concept.
It
It's really
absolutely
cool.
is. It and that's where I think this movie kind of hits its stride, is like gnarly concepts executed with just enough tongue in cheek kind of I don't know, mischievousness to to make it
Yeah.
palatable. I mean, if Chester Bennington weren't playing a skinhead, and if the people involved weren't all skinheads, if the people involved weren't all Daily Wire subscribers, then I don't know if I could properly. Was that too far? Is that too
Maybe
far?
a little.
Maybe a little.
Maybe a little.
No, but I seriously, but to make it a real point, I don't know how well I could stomach this movie if the people involved weren't objectively terrible. And obviously that's where you get into the question, well, is it torture porn if you want these people to die? And I don't know if I want them to die. I think I'm just not as bothered by their death. I mean, there is an innocent person who does get it at the end of this movie, and that was genuinely fucking brutal to watch.
Oh no, it's tough. And I mean, even these scenes, like, I think what I like it about this movie, again, I'm going to explain why later, but like this movie probably more than any other just makes me squirm, and it makes me uncomfortable because it shows a very clear trend with how these movies are going. But I don't think it does it in the way that a lot of its detractors say that it does. I, especially this first trap, like these people did not really deserve to go through this, right? Like these two guys have to choose whether or not they're going to kill the other one or the woman that they've been sleeping with, who is suspended above them and slowly descending into a large moving saw, right? Like that's not, like, nothing that she did justified that for her. They didn't really do anything wrong per se.
Well, no, it's horror movie logic. Like when you cheer on somebody, being killed in a horror movie, or you think somebody deserves to die. I mean, you're not adjudicating that person the way you would in real life.
Exactly.
It's just the visceral thrill of seeing an unpleasant person get it in some gnarly way. I mean, sometimes in horror movies you do get people who deserve their fate, and you get plenty of those through the Saw movies. And it's an interesting debate to see if we think Sean Patrick Flannery deserves what he gets or not. That'll be an interesting debate once we get there, or discussion. But but these guys, I mean, the crime of sleeping with a girl who's manipulating them. Also, I have to say this, I'm really glad this came out in 2010, way before any of this red pill shit started to pop up online, because that would really color my perception of this scene. But we weren't there yet in 2010. We were still riding the Obama high. Yes, we can.
And I will say too, with this, I'm again, there's something that I want to wait to say it till later, but I think there's a justification for something like this in this movie that really will help. It helped my perception, so hopefully it'll help somebody else's of these kills. But after this, so these ultimately these two men realize that this woman is manipulating them after she cheers on one of them when it looks like he's winning, then she cheers on the other one when
that's my favorite part of favorite part of this whole thing is actually that.
They decide she will die, which is, I think, a pretty reasonable thing to do at that point. Difficult decision, but they do it in a
well, they don't treat it like a difficult decision. We're breaking up with you, Brenda.
Yeah, it's handled pretty. And let's just say this. I just want to say this up front. Despite good things I'm going to say about this movie, there is a pretty significant and very obvious drop in quality for writing and acting in this movie. I don't want to blame the actors. I don't like to do that.
I know you're not talking about my man Carrie Elwes. I know you're not talking about my man Carrie Elwes.
I would never say a bad word about that man. No matter what, man. I would never say a bad word about that man. I mean, obviously, in the way Hollywood works today, who knows what'll come out about him? But I don't think he's one of those guys.
As an actor, as a thespian,
absolutely, I would never.
You will not hear me ever say a bad word about Carrie Elwes. No. And here's, I guess, something of a hot take. It's definitely something that people are divided on. I like his performance in the first Saw.
I like his performance in the first Saw. I like his performance in this one. He's not in this one a lot, but like, no. I like how there's just something a little off about him. Like he's a reasonable person where you could say like, okay, he would come across as like pretty normal, but there's something off about him, and that's kind of the point of these movies, right? Is like,
no, he's vaguely sinister. Yeah, he's vaguely sinister. Now, he's a man who survived a traumatizing ordeal, and who knows what that does to a person. So I don't know if that telegraphs the twist too early. The fact that he's barely in this movie until the last 10 minutes, I think, is what telegraphs the twist of his
It
character too early.
also, I mean, what was it? Saw 2 or 3 that the hooded figure is limping. I don't know. We'll get to there pretty soon.
Yeah, we
But
haven't really kind of I think talked about the timeline of these movies, like the the convoluted storyline of these movies leading up to Saw
it's all over the
7.
place.
Yeah, we got to a really messy spot by Saw 7. Uh, Dr. Gordon, played by Carrie Elways, had not been in these movies until the first one, and I think he had not returned because of some kind of legal disputes. I think, there were issues over money that he thought he had earned from the first movie's profits, but he came back
Yeah.
for this one. Now, a character we need to talk about, and I'm interested to hear your take on this guy, Mark Hoffman. He's got that dog in him. I don't care what anybody says. He's I've by this time in the movies, I've kind of come around to Mark Hoffman. It is so awkward seeing him take on the role of Jigsaw in Saw 4 and really Saw 5, because this guy was just cast to be a day player in one of the earlier Saw movies, and then the writers scrambled for a twist, for a new person to take on the role of Jigsaw, and they thought, hey, this random no-name detective from the first couple movies, what a twist that would be. And I think this actor had to grow into the role, but I think he did. By Saw 6, I probably one of my favorite sequences of these movies, of Saw 6 to be sure, is his little Terminator massacre in the police precinct. At Saw 6.
So here's what I'm going to say about him. And I guess I'll just get into, I was going to talk about this later as we talked about the kills and about the traps and such. But I like that there's a clear divide between what Hoffman does and what Jigsaw does. And Hoffman thinks he understands what Jigsaw is doing, but he doesn't really understand why he's doing it. And I really like that. That is apparent in several of these movies, but this one I feel like does it more than any other, because each of the traps are not only for the most part inescapable. I mean, like there's a way to get out of it, but it's so
usually
impossible.
Somebody has to die.
Right. And it's so nearly impossible that there's really no way that you can see our character or our hero or whatever you want to call it getting out of the situation. And I like that, because like that's not what John Kramer was about. I mean, you had to sacrifice something to get out, or you had to make a tough decision to get out of a situation, but you could get out of it reasonably without, you could reasonably get out of it.
Strong word. You could get out theoretically. Yeah.
There was the strong lesson to be learned from it. Jigsaw himself and John Kramer was more of a twisted, like demented teacher kind of, where he was trying to teach you a lesson by putting you in this situation. Whereas Hoffman, I think, understands why people are being put in there. They're doing things that are deplorable, or they've done something bad.
Yeah.
But he doesn't understand what that core
is. I think what he wants to do is punish people. And that's the way he got into the Jigsaw game, was taking out the man who killed his sister, the guy from the opening of Saw 5. And I think that's why I've always had a soft spot for Hoffman when other people think of him as this wannabe Jigsaw. He's got his own style, and he's doing his own thing. And he represents vengeance. He represents a lot of resentful things, and that doesn't make him as compelling as Jigsaw. I can't talk about his philosophy, his worldview with the same kind of level of layer, but But he's a threatening movie villain. I mean, he works as a movie villain. He's scary as hell in this movie. He has that scar running up the side of his face, which I kind of think they might have gone from Pan's Labyrinth. That came out a year before, and that had a villain go through a similar transformation. By the way, it's a great look. And again, he's his own character. I'm going to talk about him as his own character, not as this, this wannabe Jigsaw that I think other people have always viewed him as.
Well, he's one of the main focuses of this movie, which I think I sort of enjoy. This movie is two movies crammed into one 90-minute film. So it's a little tough, and there's a couple of things that feel like they fall to the wayside at certain points, and there's a couple of things that maybe feel a little bit rushed. But one of the whole points of this movie is the fact that Jill, who tried to kill Hoffman in Saw 6, is now they're now sort of trying to take the other one down, right?
Yeah, Hoffman
So
wants to kill her. It's
yeah,
this cat and mouse game. Honestly, that is the least intriguing storyline that this movie
I agree.
has, because
Yeah,
it involves some of the worst actors, namely the detectives who have been assigned to guard her. I don't know
dude.
what the hell is going on there.
Oh my God.
I think it's an attempt at camp. I cannot take these as serious performances.
Like again, I don't like to blame actors and stuff, but like there's one scene where he's like one of the detectives is supposed to be like angry and he's like, "Oh, damn it." And it's like just the way that he delivers it, it's like, "Am I watching a porno right now?" Like this is not good. This just isn't good. And it I think okay, there's already something more interesting going on in the movie, right? Like these
Yeah.
characters aren't important enough to me at this point in time that I care about their little cat and mouse game more than I care about this really interesting storyline that they set up, which by the way, great idea in my mind. So at this point in the movie, we've already seen this public live triangle after the flashback, right? We see the flashback to open the movie to the first Saw film. And then we get into this love triangle in public thing. And then we see Jill is asking for immunity to out Hoffman as Jigsaw. And she gets it from these detectives, which is definitely how the legal system works. Not going to qualm with that. I don't give a shit if you will die.
This is the same production company that produced Punisher Warzone. So let's
Right.
assume that the legal department at Lionsgate doesn't really know the proper rules of immunity, but I
I
think we
will
can
not
look past
take
that.
any Punisher Warzone slander on this podcast. Anyways,
All
yeah,
right.
so Jill asks for immunity, right? And we get that whole scene, but then we get into the more interesting storyline of this movie, which is that Sean Patrick Flannery is playing a fake Jigsaw trap survivor,
Yeah, fraud.
which I'm guessing that's kind of a play off of the whole fake 9/11 survivor
Hmm.
that was pretty famous around. I mean,
Are you
I
talking about
believe
that
she was still in.
comedian who got outed as a
No,
fake
that
9/11
that's more
survivor?
recent.
Right.
That's more recent. There was a
Yeah.
woman who so the reason I think it's connected is there was a woman, and I again our research is not great for this, so I don't recall her name at the moment, but she was not she claimed to have been in one of the towers when it went down. Not
Okay.
only did she claim that, but she went to survivor groups. She told her story to them. She would help them. Like survivors would reach out to her and be like, "Hey, you're so strong." She had these apparent scars that were from her time in the towers, and it turned out that she was not there and she was
Hmm.
outed and she disappeared from the public light. I think she moved I think she was originally from like Spain or something. I think she may have moved back there. But she was like a big press figure for a while as this very strong symbol of of strength and coming out of a situation as better than you went into it somehow. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and that's almost exactly the template they use for the character in this movie. Like he's writing a book about it. He's doing signings. He's going to these survivor meetings, and he's trying to help people within this thing that he's doing. But he has a whole story. He has scars. He has everything that you'd need to convince people that you survived a saw trap.
No, it's a great idea. And my theory is that this was going to be the whole movie back when Saw 7 was just going to be Saw 7, not necessarily the final chapter, because it
Yeah,
only became the final chapter after the box office returns from Saw 6.
right.
And this really has enough meat to be its own movie, its own story.
Absolutely.
Really, every time they cut away from this was a bit of a shame. I mean, Sean Patrick Flannery is clearly the best actor outside of Tobin Bell, who doesn't have a lot of screen time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The little bit that we get, it's I'm glad it's not his last appearance as the character. I will say that.
I
Not
agree.
the best send off,
Yeah.
but in Sean Patrick Flannery, I mean, he's the only person who uh, has something worth learning here. I mean, everything else is just punishment over. Um, I mean, yeah, it's fun to see skinheads, get their whole shit fucked up, but we don't know those
Right.
characters. I mean, they're just dropped in for the sake of having a trap. Sean Patrick
Yeah.
Flannery's he's the only character really as far as like the function of a story goes, and
We know
he's a
everything that
damn
he's
good one.
done and why he's there. And that's the most important. That's one of the most important reasons of why you like a Saw movie. I mean, the first one, of course, kind of reveals it as you go, but I mean, it's intriguing, and then you start to think, well, why are they here now? And then in the other movies, like that's something you learn about everybody, and it makes it important to then either feel for that person or root against that person when they're dying, as opposed to just being like, well, they're Nazis. Which Chester Bennington is in this movie. That scene comes right after we get the fake Saw survivor, and then we get the fake death of Jill in one of the worst 3D effects in the movie. I think it's pretty cool that they have like the gore flying at the camera, but the puppet doesn't look too good.
I think it
Um,
is not cool. I cannot stress enough how much I wish this was not 3D. I mean, I lament 3D in any of these movies, and
yeah.
man, what a way that things really come full circle, or things really work in waves. Like 30 years after the 3D craze of the early 80s, now we have to do it again. Even though, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't we all agree that those 3D movies from the 80s have aged worse because they were 3D? I mean, does anybody think that Friday the 13th 3D needed to be in 3D?
So this is going to be really funny coming from me because 3D movies not only give me a headache, but most of the time they make me sick. So I can't watch them in 3D. That said, there's this, and I talked about this in My Bloody Valentine video, which that movie came out just a year before this one.
Mm.
This is in the 3D craze, right? Just after this movie, I think a year after or 2 years after we would get Texas Chainsaw 3D. This was we got what Piranha 3D all around sort of the same time.
Now, I will say
There's this,
I respect the fact that back then they would do 3D for the third movies. It was
yes,
Jaws 3D. It was
right,
Amityville 3D. Now we were slapping it on willy-nilly. There was no rhyme or reason, and I won't stand for that.
yeah. No, and you know what? I completely agree. It's something that honestly, like, so we almost got a Halloween 3D in Rob
Yeah.
Zombie's Halloween movies, which honestly, like, I think that's a potential good topic of conversation one day. But I still would want to see that. And like here's my thing about 3D movies. I really enjoy watching them not in 3D, and I think the reason is because it's just like it's so clear that they're making a movie, and it doesn't break me out of it, but there's this commercialization about it that just like warms my heart a little bit,
It warms
like
your heart. The
yeah,
commercialization warms your heart. That's the
you
most
know what?
bourgeois thing.
Let me tell
That's
you why. Let me tell you why. I love the spectrum of art, like I'm not one of those people who's going to tell you that, if you like a movie, if you prefer a movie like Midnight Movie over Hereditary, right? I'm not the kind of person to be like, oh, well, you don't know what art is, or you don't think, and I'm that way across everything. I mean, there's debates about what is and what isn't art in film, in like actual physical art, in professional wrestling, in several things that are surrounding the world of the arts. And I think policing that is so dumb. And so, occasionally I love the idea of a movie. It's one of the reasons I'm so upset that I don't like the Transformers movies. Those are just popcorn movie. Like you just go into those and have fun, and it's a movie, and you're, like sometimes it's difficult to like stay immersed into that world. But there's like I almost appreciate that it's an option that we have. I think that's what I'm missing today about these kind of movies is like I think anybody should have an option of watching a 3D, movie that doesn't look as good as the other ones, but is 3D and it's got these cool effects. And I think it's cool that we have movies that are elevated. And I think it's cool that we have movies that are, these like indie schlock fests, like that variety I appreciate so much that I love those kind of movies.
I don't think that's, I think that's a false choice personally. I don't
Could
mind
be.
commercialization. A lot of my favorite movies that inspire me are really toy commercials or commercials for
Yeah,
some kind of
right.
brand of property. You know,
Yeah.
this the Sam Raimi Spider-Man has a whole scene dedicated to Macy Gray because she had a Sony deal with she had a deal with Sony, a record deal with
Right.
Sony. So that's not what I'm talking about. But Macy Gray doesn't interfere with the creative process. She doesn't interfere necessarily with the way they're going to shoot Spider-Man or the way you know the way they're going to choreograph and block some crucial sequences. But that's what 3D does. Okay, that 3D is the reason the blood looks fake as shit. Why the gore is all wonky and kind of plastic. I mean, there's another reason why it's hard for me to take the violence seriously in this movie. It's not just because of the campy approach. It's just because the gore has no visceral quality to it. When I watched Chester Bennington get his skin peeled off, it's gross in a kind of roadkill way, but it's
Right.
not. No, it's not visceral the way the gore had been done in the previous few films. Now, for some people, that might make it more palatable. Again, it's not going to be as much. It's not going to get under your skin as much. But if you, and now the 3D is like shoving my face in it. So, and it's kind of the worst of both worlds for me. If it was just kind of lame, then I could say at least it's inoffensive. But that's not what the 3D is going for, man. It really wants to immerse you in the ugliest, nastiest parts of a Saw movie. So that's where I bump up against it, and I'm just anti 3D in general. I mean, for God's sakes, if your home media release doesn't include 3D glasses, then to me this was just a jip all along. It wasn't at all a part of the real creative process, and nobody's taken the time to preserve it in its rightful way. So, and I'm not saying
I
I
could,
hate all of these old 3D movies. I just watched
yeah.
Jaws 3D the other day. People consider that a travesty. I had a good time with it.
Well, honestly, like I totally understand what you're saying there, and it does change the way that the movie is shot. It changes the way that certain scenes are play out. I don't know. There's something about those movies that just make them feel like, even though some of what makes a 3D movie fun sort of cheapens the movie, it makes it feel bigger to me. And I think it's just the time period, right? Like
Mhm.
when these were coming around, like these movies always felt bigger. They always felt like there was more pushed behind the marketing for it because they wanted people to experience the 3D, right? And I feel like Saw, especially at this point, if you're gonna do something, and maybe this works against you in this movie, but it actually works for me a little bit, is like some of these kills are the most gruesome that we've seen, as at
Mhm.
least in principle are the most gruesome that we've seen, and they're happening to characters that are increasingly less deserving. So it's sort of helpful to me to be able to see these scenes that are just kind of like almost comical. They're not comical, but like they sort of detach you a little bit from what's happening. I almost appreciate that because I'm still witnessing it happen, but it's not like, oh, the effects are so terrible, except for this Jill scene, which is a dream sequence. I'll give him that. um it's sort of, I appreciate that. I sort of feel disconnected. And by the way, despite being anti 3D as far as somebody who will watch 3D movies because they literally make me sick, I'm very pro 3D. Like I will seek out movies that are in 3D to watch, just on Blu-ray at home, just to see the ways that they like coming up with, what are they going to make 3D? What are they? What aren't they? Can I tell? Resident Evil Afterlife is an example where it's like you can tell every single scene that they are trying to make 3D. This is another example, but for me, this is like one of the franchises that you do that for. It just sort of helps make it feel bigger, but
Mhm.
also, it doesn't directly put you in the face of the violence as much as I think they intended to.
Well, it's a testament to how much of a cash cow this franchise still was, even
I'll agree
even
with that.
though
Yes.
it was, starting to run out of gas. But regardless of the 3D, let's talk about some more of these traps. I think we get some mixed results from the Sean Patrick Flannery obstacle course. One of those traps doesn't even feel like it belongs in a Saw movie or a horror movie. It feels almost
Yeah.
like some kind of a Indiana Jones thing where he's he's trying to save his friend from being hanged, and so he has to kind of trapeze and parkour around
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
all of these banisters, and it was kind of a fun scene. Honestly, it just kind of took
Agreed.
me out of that Saw experience. And for a second, I almost thought he was going to save his friend. Like I really forgot what kind of movie I was watching. Of course, he's not going to save his friend. We're not here to watch somebody get saved. Even when people do get saved, they don't get saved. One of my favorite parts of
Right.
Jaws 3 is how they save this guy from a terrible death, being drowned in pig guts, only for the next scene for him to get shot in the face with a shotgun.
I think it plays up. I think especially during this sequence, like it seems like everything's just set up to torture this guy. And I like how each one of them, he gets so close, and he gets so close to saving his friend or to saving his wife or to saving somebody, and he just can't do it. And that
His
speaks to
poor
Hoffman and
wife,
how
man.
Hoffman is. Yeah.
Well, that's an
The
interesting
poor wife,
question.
dude, the wife is just like that
I
honestly,
don't
so
like
it's like
that.
kind of one of my favorite things like about the movie and about the Saw movies. Like it's one of my favorite I think it's very intricate, but I like the story significance of it. I like how it plays out. But it just breaks your heart.
It's the most
It's not
suspenseful.
supposed to.
It's the most suspenseful
Yeah.
thing this movie has to offer. It's still something that has stuck with me ever since I first watched it. I was really not prepared for
No.
um, how violated I was going to feel by that whole sequence. But my question is, who's doing this trap? Is this a Jigsaw legacy trap, or is this Hoffman's conception?
My understanding is that so maybe I'm wrong, and Saw fans I'm sure will be quick to tell me that I'm wrong, but I see this more from like maybe it almost feels like it was started as a John Kramer Jigsaw trap, but not finished as one, because we know Jigsaw knows of this guy, right? Like
Mhm.
they meet. That's the hello
in
fellow
in
kid scene.
Tobin Bell's one scene, his one
Yeah,
3 minute scene in this
yeah,
movie.
where he Steve Buscemi's his way in there. But everything about it feels more Hoffman, right? Like innocent life, uh, that's going to be lost. Pretty much impossible to do them. I mean, like it's possible, but it's not. Especially like the one that got me was the sound one, right?
Uh,
Like decent idea, right? A pretty cool looking trap, but it's like everything about it is out of the control of the person that's doing it, and maybe that's the point, but like it's disgusting and it hurts to watch. Like you can almost feel it, and it hurts, and you're watching it, and like how is he supposed to succeed at this? He has no control over whether or not she makes noise or doesn't. He's just going to kill his friend while trying to save her, or kill this woman while trying to save her, right? And it's like it feels so much more on the Hoffman side of things, where it's like you can get out of this, but you're not gonna, like it's not gonna happen. So I don't know. It's hard to say because the movie doesn't spell it out for you, but I sort of saw this as like John Kramer is aware that this guy's doing this stuff. So he starts this trap and maybe Hoffman finishes it, because there are things about it that are very Jigsaw, but the core of it is what Hoffman's done over the last few movies, especially in this one so far.
well, we have to remember why people were coming to see the Saw movies, what they wanted, what they expected, and we had grown out of the Jigsaw era. I mean, the John Kramer era of Jigsaw.
Right.
There's really no going back after you've escalated it so drastically. It's like the Halloween franchise. After
Yeah.
Halloween, after the original Halloween too, they started trying to compete with the Jasons of the world, the Freddy Kruegers of the world. There's no really going
Yeah.
back to that. Every time they say they're going to go back to the original tone of Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween. I mean, they try in some ways, but they're never going to like tame it down, to really honor the spirit of that original movie.
Yeah, and people don't like it. Like I
No,
think
they
the
don't want
most
that.
the
They don't want that
no,
at
like
all.
the David Gordon Green movies, as flawed as they are in certain parts, like that speaks to the core of what the first Halloween movie was all about, and people hated how that ended. The ending of Halloween Ends is exactly what the first movie was trying to tell you, and people were like, "No, I want to see Michael Myers," which I get. Halloween is my second favorite film franchise, but Saw is up there for me to be, if I'm being honest with you, because I think no matter what people say about these, and you see it on Letterboxd, like as you go through the series, like there are ups and downs, peaks and valleys, um, but like I would consider it one of the most consistent. Like the first movie, I think I hold that on a pedestal. I know people will prefer. I think people either prefer that or Saw 2 or 3,
I
right?
prefer Saw 2. That's the one I put on the
Yeah,
pedestal. Saw 1 is damn good. It's a damn good horror movie, and it deserves credit for starting the mammoth uh, franchise that it
yeah,
did. But I like the Saw movies in the way that I like a TV show. I almost don't like. I don't like. I love The Office, and there are episodes I prefer to the others. I favorites, but it's still like I love it collectively as The Office. You know what I mean?
right.
Yeah,
That's
that's
exactly what I'm saying about Saw.
yeah.
Right. It's like I feel like quality wise, like I don't think anything dips too far until you get to Jigsaw in my mind. I don't think anything goes way too far off base. I think this movie is probably the closest to doing that. But like all of them, I would put within similar, except for the first one to me was just such an experience seeing it for the first time and
Sure.
seeing the twist and experiencing it. And by the way, somebody that I think deserves an incredible amount of credit is Charlie Closer, the composer for this. We talked a little bit about him like
Hello
over a
Zep.
year ago.
Yeah, Hello
Um,
Zep is one of my favorite
oh,
musical themes in
period.
cinema. In
Yeah,
cinema, not I was about to say in
100%.
horror movies. No, that doesn't really cover it. In fact, how people say that like the original cut of Halloween wasn't scary. It was only scary after John Carpenter added the score. So really, the score
Right.
here kind of makes or breaks it. I put Charlie's contributions right on that level. Right on that level.
It is one of the best like main themes of a movie franchise ever in my mind. And it still to this day when I hear that song, especially when it drops into the real the real meat of the song,
Yeah.
uh that it gets me like gives me chills when I hear it. It's perfect, and it's done and it's used, and I want to give the editing team, and I want to give the sound mixing, I want to give everybody credit, because it's often in these movies, even the ones that are a little bit lower on the totem pole for me, executed really well and used effectively throughout those scenes, even in
Here,
this one.
here's how you know it's a great score. It elevates the
Yes,
material.
absolutely.
This some of the twists in these movies are fucking ridiculous. But when that music
At
starts
times, yeah.
playing, I feel like I'm watching like the most cerebral fucking movie.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm watching like
Oh
some
yeah.
a masterpiece because the music elevates it so much. And I feel like, yeah, they really have 5D their 5D chest their way to the finish line here.
Yeah.
And the same goes for Saw 3D. When we get our inevitable twist of what exactly Dr. Gordon's role in the story is.
Yeah.
Yep, people will say they saw it coming from a mile away, and I think we said it's telegraphed too early or too much. But I don't know, man. When that score kicks in and when he
Yeah.
throws that little saw towards the camera, man, I don't know. I'm,
Dude.
I'm getting swept up in all of it.
Okay. Let me so I want to do an aside in a moment, because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. But that scene is shit on by detractors of this movie,
Mm-hmm.
where he throws the saw at the camera. And I know the 3D effect, whatever you want to say about it, I don't care. I think it's perfect. I love it so much. The score is perfect, and the way that they go into slow-mo and the saw flies at the camera, there's just something about it that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite endings in a little bit, like in the franchise. I think since maybe since Saw 3. Um, it's one of the better endings in my mind. And it plays out so well, and I want to bring this up because I think it's relevant to, and it speaks to the quality of the movies, and especially the quality of the score and how it plays into the story of each movie. Have you ever seen the movie The Collector?
No.
Okay, so the movie The Collector has some pretty rough scenes to get through for people who don't like gore, or who don't like not so much gore, but like people being hurt and tortured. And my wife saw that before she saw any Saw film. Okay. Now, I tried to talk her into watching the Saw movies, and she just knew them as torture porn. She didn't want to watch them. She saw, I think, one scene before and was just totally turned off, didn't want to watch it. And I said, let's watch the first one. And then anytime you don't want to watch another one afterwards, we'll cut it off at that movie. If it's the first one, that's all we'll watch. If it's the second one, then we'll just watch those two, and we'll just watch until you don't want to watch them anymore. And we got through those movies in 2 days, all of them, up to but this was before Jigsaw came out. But we got through the entire franchise. And that speaks to the quality of these movies in my mind, because somebody who is like, she'll close her eyes at like medical TV shows because it's too much. But she watched the entire Saw franchise and enjoyed them and was excited for the next one. It was asking questions and was
Mm-hmm.
engaged. And I think if you put somebody in front of these movies, especially who doesn't know any of the story beats, watching this franchise, including this movie, by the way, because this movie wraps up something that's set up in the first Saw film and is hinted at in the second Saw film. It wraps it up in this movie, and it sort of takes every storyline that we've been seeing throughout and finishes them off. In a way, it works as a final chapter. If you weren't to do it again, I think it could have been a little more grand, but it's a testament to how good the score works for the story, how well they were able to keep this story up despite some questionable things. It wasn't perfect, but it
Yeah, I'm always a
was
little.
well done.
I There are people out there who really pride themselves in being aficionados of trash cinema. Of B
Right.
movies, Z movies,
Yeah.
slasher movies, exploitation movies. I'm thinking people like Jay from Red Letter Media.
Right. Yeah.
And Jay shits on the Saw movies. And I'm like, really thinking about it, like thinking about all of the movies that are the pillars of the taste of people like Jay Bauman, uh, who's a guy I like a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I kind of aspire to be him in a lot of ways, but I'm really thinking about it. I'm thinking about how much more thought actually goes into making a Saw movie. Just when you look at the plot beats, just when you look at the characters, the mysteries, I was like, that was the moment it clicked for me how little credit these movies get, like how much
Yeah.
the torture porn label really overshadows any of the other things. Like I think Saw fans are just as excited about what the final twist is going to be, about who these characters are, because often
Yeah.
there's somebody who is not who they say they are. And kind of like how the Scream movies are rewatchable because you get to go back and see the clues to who Jigsaw is,
Yeah.
Ghostface is.
You're right. Yeah.
In this case, it's a very similar thing, even when the twist isn't executed perfectly, and it rarely is perfect. It's not perfect in the first Saw movie. There's still enough forethought that makes it a really rewarding experience of being a Saw fan. And I think that's what keeps people coming back to these movies. If you're just here for the traps, you can watch the clips of that on YouTube.
Yeah, and I think what we can do here is we can sort of just take people through a pretty expedited ending of this movie. And so our guy who fakes the saw traps ends up having to prove himself, and he has a series of traps that he has to go through. including at one point, yeah, saving his friend. He has to pull his teeth out for a combination code that's on his teeth for one of them, so he has to yank them out. He has to pull a key out of a woman's throat. It's in her stomach, but it's attached to a fish hook, so it is clawing its way through her as he pulls it out. But every time she makes a sound, these poles move towards her neck to stab her. And then we get his final test, which is the saw trap he claims to have survived. Now he claims that when he was put in the saw trap, that he was forced to stab his pectoral muscles with 2 hooks and then use his own weight to pull himself up to safety. The twist is, though, for the trap that if he has to do this to save his wife, his innocent wife, who's done nothing wrong but support her husband. Now she is chained up throughout this whole thing. You can see her, and I believe every time he fails, she gets pulled down. But it could just be the passage of time, because they do that in these movies.
Yeah, I think it's either a ticking clock or every time he fails. But yeah, she's getting pulled into this furnace.
Well, that's the kind of cool part, is that you don't really know that it's kind of a furnace yet.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
She's on this metal platform, and there's this chain, and it's in the ground, and every time we show her again, whether he fails or whether it's a passage of time, she's getting yanked closer to the ground, to where she's like, basically she's kneeling at this point as he's trying to pull himself up, and she's really, cheering him on, and he's doing his best, but in the end, he fails. His pectoral muscles tear, and he falls to the ground. And almost as soon as he does, this metal grate opens up under her and swallows her into this incinerator, where she is burned to death. And that scene is very difficult to watch, because she did not deserve it. And in a way, you think he deserved it, but did he? He deserves to be shamed for faking being in a saw trap. And sure, maybe in the context of the film and that morality, right. Sure.
I mean, that's like saying a fake 9/11 survivor deserves to be in one of the towers
in 9/11. Yeah, we're gonna put you in a tower and hit it with a plane. It's just and he's a little different from her, because he was pushing it and milking it for money, but he was also he wasn't looking down on real survirers. He was trying to help them.
He's an interesting character, because he does not reek of irredeemable sleazeball,
right?
Even though, I mean, what he's doing is terrible, and it is belittling real survivors, and he's exploiting their tragedies, so you can't condone it. But he actually seems like a human being.
Right.
Sean Patrick Flannery, I've heard he is not a pleasant man to work with, and he is making some questionable career choices, making some Christian propaganda. But dude's a good actor. We've known he's a good actor ever since the Boondock Saints, and he really delivers. He delivers on the pathos here, and that's kind of the thing. When it's just Chester Bennington pretending to play a skinhead, you can watch limbs get torn off, skin get peeled off, people get run over and their jaws ripped off. You can watch any of that, but just the simple feeling of watching a real human being go through this, even when that human being is deeply flawed, especially when their wife is involved, their innocent partner is involved. I mean, that's what puts it over the top for sure, and that actress is really selling it. I think
she's pretty good. I like her.
Pretty good. And I think we're both husbands here, and I think we can probably relate to the shame we would feel failing to save our wives.
Oh my God. And but having to watch it too, it's it's terrible.
In a way, it is the cruelest trap or experience that I think this franchise has put somebody through. I think you could make the argument for that psychologically.
Yeah, I think it's this one, and then maybe the ice block trap with Donnie Wahlberg. I think that one's pretty rough too.
But
where he gets
that's
crushed.
instant though. That's an
Yeah,
instant
no, it
death.
is. You're right. Like that, it's on a similar level, but it's not near what like this one is like. Especially this viewing,
Mm.
like watching it again now. I feel like the older I get, the worse that scene gets. Like as a teenager, I was like, oh, like that kind of sucks. And then I watched it again a couple years later. It's like,
Nope, don't
I don't
like
know
that.
about that. And now
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't even want to watch it anymore. Like it's rough.
And you know
But
the crazy thing is that's really the notes that well that storyline ends there. You know
yes,
the movie still
yeah.
has a few other things to wrap up, but that to me is kind of like the closing note of this original run of Saw movies. It ends on the most despicable note.
I don't necessarily see it that way per se. I almost see this as like the last stand for Hoffman, right? Like because immediately after we get this, Hoffman sets it up to where he's gonna blow up all of the evidence and he's gonna get away with it, right? And as he is escaping, we think he's gotten away.
Well,
A bunch
first
of pig masks come
he's
out.
killed Jill with
Oh,
the bear claw trap.
he's killed everybody. He
He's killed
turned into a
everybody.
slasher. Yeah.
Worse than a slasher. I mean, the Terminator. That's
Pretty much, yeah.
what
He was
comes
the
to
he
mind.
was like the Terminator in the original movie.
Right. And we finally see the bear trap go off, and
Yeah.
it goes off on Jill, who's been a pretty useless character. So that one is, I mean, I don't really like violence against women. I hope that doesn't sound like virtue signaling. It's just a very unpleasant thing for me to see.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, but in the context of it, I mean, she's no innocent either. She's no angel, and she's a pretty useless character. So that is what it is. But yeah, then he thinks he's won, but we know there's something up. Jigsaw, well, he did let his wife die, but he wouldn't let the man who killed his wife get away
Yeah.
with it.
No, and yeah, he gets out and you see the cool guy doesn't look at the explosion as he walks away and you think a normal movie fan, maybe you're watching this for the first time, you've never seen another Saw movie, you're like, okay, he's gonna get away with this, and then a bunch of pig masks come out and take him down, and one of them stabs a serum into his neck, and before he passes out it is revealed to be Dr. Gordon, Cary Elwes from the first movie. And we get this whole sort of, I mean, very Saw-like, sequence where all is revealed. We go back in time to different Saw traps and different things, and it's revealed that basically, like anything that you saw that was medical, came from Dr. Gordon. So stuff being sewn into somebody, things like that. That's all been Dr. Gordon since the first movie. And Dr. Hoffman passes out. He wakes up in the spot of the original Saw trap, where the saw is on the ground, and he's got Hoffman reaches for it, but to no avail. It's picked up by Dr. Gordon and thrown in what I think is one of the better endings of the franchise, and he gives the same line that Jigsaw gives in the first movie. Game over.
Game over.
And closes him in, which, man, I just want to say I understand why some people might feel underwhelmed by this movie as a whole, and the fact that it's supposed to be a final chapter. I understand where people could feel almost kind of cheated, especially since, especially now knowing that it was supposed to be a two-parter, and that you have basically two movies in one 90-minute Saw finale. There is a sense, a part of me that feels kind of cheated, right? But that ending, for me, the ending of the movie, the very end, is pretty much exactly what I would have wanted from a final chapter of these characters that we've been with, or at least seen since the first movie. I don't know. What say you? Is this a complaint for you like it is with the rest of the audience?
Well, the movie as a whole is definitely underwhelming as a final chapter for what, for a franchise that postures itself like an epic saga. I mean, it's a 90-minute hodgepodge of two different movies. So, I mean, that's going to be inevitable. I wish we could have gotten more with Dr. Gordon. I really do. That's his him missing in action for so much of the movie is the biggest missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And who know? I mean, I imagine it's because they were paying for 3D. They couldn't pay Carrie Elways for more than 3 days to be on set.
Right.
But I hear what you're saying about that actual final ending. I mean, I think you could have put that ending on almost any of these movies and gotten the same result. It's a really solid ending to a pretty uneven movie, and it's no longer the ending. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, but we haven't had a movie since that's actually taken place after Saw 7, like after the timeline of Saw 7, because
So
we've
believe
had
it
a
or
bunch
not,
of reboots.
I don't know. So I saw Jigsaw, and that turned me off of Saw completely. So when I saw, infamously, I have not seen a lot of movies that have come out over the last few years. So I didn't see Spiral, and I didn't see Saw 10. So
You didn't see Saw
I don't
10?
know.
Oh, Saw
No,
10. Saw
not
10
yet.
is worth seeing. It's
I
worth
heard it
seeing.
was very much a return to form. I've heard some people say best since Saw 2.
I don't
Um,
agree with that. It's not better than Saw 6 in my opinion, but it's an upper tier Saw movie. And
I've been meaning to see it.
it was so weird seeing the establishment, the Hollywood establishment, really embrace Saw 10, and the critics embraced it. Like it got a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes or something crazy like that.
This movie got a 9.
Is Saw 10 times better than Saw 7? It's not. Um,
Oh
it's
man.
I don't really know how to do a formula here. I mean, there's a lot of variables to what makes a Saw movie good. This movie doesn't hit on all of them, but it hits on enough of them. I mean, I'll watch it. It's included in the marathons, and I'll always remember some of the scars that it gave me on my first viewing. And that's probably the reason I actually can't return to the movie that often. I mean, it is a really ugly movie in some respects, but hey,
Yeah.
what am I complaining for? That's a Saw movie, and it
Yeah. Huh.
culminates the story of Jigsaw. And none of the promises of Saw 7 have been broken, which is interesting. Like they haven't brought back any of these characters, they haven't retconned anything. This franchise has shown so much restraint in that regard. Like Jason, they'll dig him up, they'll bring him back
Oh
to
yeah.
life. You know, they'll bring back Freddy. They didn't bring Jigsaw back to life. They have gone through painstaking efforts to not do that or to not retcon anything in the franchise. And
Yeah.
to me, that's always been something that's clearly commendable about this series of movies.
Oh, I agree. I mean, how easy would it have been for them to just be like, well, John Kramer's not really dead. He was misdiagnosed and he was just sick with something else. And when you watched him die, he didn't really die. They could have done it. And, you know, maybe some fans wouldn't have been upset, but I like that they've stuck with what they have set up. And
Mm-hmm.
not only in movies that have come out afterwards, like I even appreciated that about the movie Jigsaw. I didn't appreciate much about it, but I appreciated that. Um, there's no scene that's like somehow Jigsaw has returned, you know? And my favorite franchise of all time has a moment like that. Of course, Halloween has moments where, you
Mm-hmm.
know, there's no way he could have survived. And you know, I just appreciate a franchise that's like, look, if we're going to make another movie, we're going to be creative about it. And, you know, that's had mixed results, especially since the final chapter, but even including the final chapter. Um, it's had mixed results over the years, but for me, like, you know, pretty much like you said earlier, I think the original run of these movies has been great. Jigsaw turned me down from the franchise for a little
Mm-hmm.
while, but I always planned to go back and see Spiral. I always planned to see Saw 10 after I found out it was coming out, and Saw 11 is coming at this point. And we are getting the same director. He's coming back again. So this will be interesting to see how Saw continues to age. But for now, I mean, the fact that there's really only one movie, and I haven't seen, granted, I haven't seen the two recent ones, but there's only one movie in the entire franchise that I can say I don't like. That's a pretty successful run in my mind, and I think that leaves us with
Yeah.
nothing left to discuss besides our final verdicts. Correct?
Yeah, and I will say, if Jigsaw is the worst movie in your franchise, you've had a pretty good franchise.
Oh yeah. I
Like you're
mean,
pretty
look,
spoiled.
some horror movies, man, like some horror franchises go way out of their way to be different or to be crazy, and they in doing so make an awful movie, or at least a movie that you can't appreciate for the same reasons that you appreciate the other ones. Like, I
Mhm.
brought Halloween Resurrection to this channel, but I don't appreciate it as a Halloween film. I appreciate it as like a palate cleanser, funny to laugh at type of movie. So yeah, I mean, this franchise doesn't have that, which is, I think, a testament to how well, how much care has been put into it, which is really surprising considering the fact that the original director has not come back to a movie, which is also kind of rare in a franchise. John
Well,
Carpenter never
yeah,
returned to Halloween, but
it's kind of
you know,
not that rare when you think about it. John Carpenter, Sean S. Cunningham never directed another Friday movie. Wes Craven did return for one movie, and I think that's the exception that proves the rule. He returned to make a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, but
yeah,
he technically didn't because he stepped outside the world of a Nightmare on Elm Street,
well,
and
in a fantastic movie.
in a
But
fantastic movie, but he felt so uncomfortable returning to that franchise that he had to kind of like create some almost creative loophole for himself. But yeah, it's I mean, Saw launched James Wan's career. He's doing very well for himself. I'm
oh
sure he
yeah,
does not feel the need to come back. I guess
rightfully so.
if Aquaman 2 had flopped hard, maybe he would have come back. I don't know.
He doesn't, he doesn't strike me as a guy that looks back at all. Like I could see somebody like I don't know. I can even see somebody like a John Carpenter, eventually taking some time to look back and returning to a franchise after a while. Sean S.
Well,
Cunningham, even. I mean, there are directors who have directed within a franchise and then,
yeah.
returned later. I mean, Rick
Well,
Rosenthal did the second Halloween and then he did Resurrection. There are examples.
there are examples. I think the trend tends to be like when you have a director who proves themselves in one movie. I mean, very often they look at that movie as a stepping stone. No matter how fond we
Right.
are of it, that's what it usually represents to them. Like John Carpenter, I don't think has any warm feelings towards the Halloween franchise. Not
I,
enough
I
to.
I think sometimes he has very cold feelings against it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think he
I
goes
think
through waves. Yeah,
it depends on if he's having a bad day or not. But I mean,
and a
for a
lot of
long
those
time
nowadays.
he was ambivalent at best.
Yeah.
And James Wan, I mean, we know that he's not happy with the direction this franchise took. He and Lee Winnall have been vocal about that. And Lee
Yeah.
Winnall, before he left Twitter, he said something so funny. First, he said that he's as involved in the Saw films now as Jimmy Carter is in national politics. Bedridden Jimmy Carter. And then he said for a while he had so checked out of these movies that he like when people would ask him what he thought about Mark Hoffman, he would have no idea what they were talking about. For a long time, he just had no idea. So
You know,
they have
I
both
find
moved
that
on.
sad. I find that really sad especially with a franchise like this.
I
I
find,
understand
yeah,
like John Carpenter not give, and like I heard a story about Jamie Lee Curtis kind of being cold towards Danielle Harris at the Halloween Ends premiere about Danielle Harris being like, "Oh, I played your daughter in the Halloween movies." And she was like, "Oh, I didn't see those."
well, that
I
was
get
just like
it.
a lack of basic
Well,
etiquette in
that
that
was just being a
case.
dick. That was
Yeah, that
just
was
being a
just being a
dick,
dick.
and she was being a dick for no reason. But there's an understanding that I hold for like somebody like John Carpenter, maybe not for his bitterness, but for just not really like having to either having to disconnect yourself from them because you're not involved and you're on to bigger and better things, or just not caring because you're in bigger and better
Right.
things. It's like it's not my problem anymore.
Look,
Um,
I don't
I
begrudge
get it.
anybody from just moving on from
Right.
a project. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly wish some people had the freedom to do that. I think a lot of times when somebody's stuck around in a franchise, very often it's because, well, that's the only stable line of work that they have found is sticking around for these movies. I want people to have the freedom to go and venture off to new things,
Yeah.
but if they have more passion for the project, if they really have more stories they want to tell in franchise, then yeah, I mean, they can come back. They're always welcome to come back. Um, yeah, I think James Wan and Lee Winnell are doing very well for themselves. I'm very excited, especially for Lee Winnell, to see what he does next.
Yeah.
And what he does next, I hope, is not Saw 12. Personally, I
Yeah.
think he has a couple of things on the horizon that are a bit more intriguing for
I
me.
heard he might be attached to the new Wolfman reboot that's coming up.
He is. He
Yeah.
is. And by the way, guess what Shot Factory is releasing on 4K pretty soon?
No, please don't tell me.
I don't even need to tell you, son. You already know.
Son of a bitch.
We
Well,
call
there are
that
fans.
validation, folks. That's what we call
Yeah.
validation.
Well, I'm happy for you. And I'm, Lee Wanell, like you said, he's got a really impressive resume as a director now. I think Upgrade is fantastic. I think The
Mhm.
Invisible Man is fantastic. And so, yeah, he's doing fine. He's going to keep doing fine. I'm glad he's gotten the opportunity to really prove himself. And by the way, I think Insidious Chapter 3, which he also directed, is underrated. It's been on this channel before.
Yeah, that's right.
And so yeah, I think that's a lot of fun. But yeah, I think you want to get to our final verdicts on this one?
Yeah, I think so. I think, gosh, we have not covered our whole thoughts about the Saw franchise. We have many thoughts, and I could talk about these movies for a long time.
Oh yeah.
Um, and there's a couple different ways to judge a movie like Saw 7. If I were to look at it as a conclusion to a series of films that I really adore, it doesn't really cut it for a lot of the reasons we've laid out. I mean, it
Yeah.
was a rush production. It was a troubled production creatively,
Yeah.
and I think 3D interfered with the direction, and I just think it dropped the ball on a number of things that makes a great Saw movie. But where it doesn't drop the ball, you have a pretty great set of traps for a pretty compelling hero's journey, even if that ends in the most tragic way. You have pretty fitting conclusion to a couple of storylines. It was great to see Carrie Elways come back. I hope he comes back again for future Saw films, however that would work. Mark Hoffman, I think, gets his just due, and he's a character that I think deserved a conclusion of his own, and I think he got one. And yeah, this movie delivers on just enough to say, yeah, it's a worthy Saw film. I'm glad it's not the last Saw film. I'm glad now other movies have come and taken that burden off of its shoulders. Now it can just be another movie in the Saw franchise. And I think on those grounds, it's worthy. People think it's the worst. It's not the worst, so I can definitively say it's not that bad.
Perfect. Happy to hear you say it. Um, yeah. I think I like what you said there about kind of putting it up and also holding it on its own and kind of where it is now in the history of the Saw franchise. I would agree certainly with what you said about this movie not really being a fitting film in for a conclusion. What I do think though that it does almost to perfection is being a fitting end to the story.
Mhm.
And I think for me, I'm really glad that that outweighs it for me. I know people saw it coming. I know what they're going to say, and I know that I'm not really worried about that because it's my opinion. I think there's a lot of really good things about this movie. There's a lot of things about this movie that make it tough to watch, and I didn't really get into as many negatives in this as I intended to, because I do have a lot of affection for this. But ultimately, like there are scenes that the acting is almost laughably bad. There are times where lines of dialogue are laughably bad, and there are times where aside from the 3D, which I've said kind of disconnects me, but in a fun way. There are parts of this movie where I was completely disconnected and felt like I was watching a much a production much less becoming of a franchise like this. That being said, that's not the whole movie,
Mhm.
and so I'm happy to say that I think with certain things that are perfect about this movie, it does outweigh a lot of the bad. Um, I would say this movie has a 2.3. Um, I can't be as enthusiastic about this one as I would some other movies we've discussed. So I'm gonna give it a not that bad as well.
Mhm.
I want to go actually good. It's definitely on the high end of the not that bad spectrum for me, but ultimately, um, my rating would be the same if this was still the conclusion. But I have a little bit more love for it now that it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have that burden, like you said. I think that was a really good way of putting it.
Mhm.
Yeah, here we are. I think Not That Bad is perfect, and I think we agree on this one.
It's a solid, not that bad if ever I've seen one.
It's time for us to do our best to horror ourselves out. So, folks, thank you for watching our discussion about Saw 3D slash Saw 7 slash Saw the Final Chapter slash Saw 3D the Final Chapter slash Saw the Final Chapter 3D. It was definitely a fun discussion for me, and I always like talking about a franchise like Saw, one that means a lot to me. And I hope we were able to present a good defense for it. If you did enjoy the video, there are ways that you can support us, and there are free ways you can support us. But before I tell you what those are, I would like my co-host to tell you about how you can support us financially. Gabe, how can they give us their money?
With the same way that you can give any of your favorite creators money,
name a white guy. He's got one of these.
Yeah. It's P to the A to the T to the R to the E to the O to the N. Patreon. Go look up a Patreon. Look up all the goodies that we offer. We offer not only exclusive episodes but exclusive clips taken from public episodes that we have saved just for y'all, those who deem us worthy enough for your support, which we are always grateful for. So yeah, go on over to our Patreon, check out all the exclusive benefits that we offer, exclusive episodes, exclusive clips, exclusive merch, the works. And, if you can't support us that way, if you still want to support the channel, just like and subscribe. Share the video with your friends. If you're a horror hound, share it with people that you think could benefit from hearing, defenses of all of these black sheep movies, and get that conversation started.
Yeah, and luckily we have one convenient location for you to find all of these links and more, and that's thatbadmedia.com. Now, on our previous episodes, we have talked about notthatbadpod.com. That website will still take you to thatbadmedia.com. It'll take you to the Not That Bad section, so that link is still usable for those that did ask that question. However, thatbadmedia.com is the place to go for all of that information. You can find links to our YouTube, to everywhere we post podcast version. You can find links to our Patreon. You can find a forum to contact us if you'd like to tell us something and you don't want to put it in the comments. If you just want to send us a hate email, you can do it on our website. You can also read about how the show got started and all of the facts and information that we decided we wanted to put on the internet. So that's the place to go if you want everything all-encompassing for That Bad Media, and we would appreciate it greatly. But like Gabe said, liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting, these are all ways that you can help this channel and this brand grow, and it would mean the world to us. So thank you for your support so far, and thank you for any support in the future. Think that's enough whoring for now. Gabe, would you like to take us out, my friend?
Yeah, well, as Connor said, I am Gabe.
And I am Connor.
And this is That Bad Media. And we are signing out.